when you're standing in front of it, you are confronted with the greatest mystery of all time. Who built this place? How could it have been constructed? Why is it still standing? And then when you go inside it, you have the feeling like you are in the hands of an extraordinary intelligence.
How were the pyramids actually built? Well, new evidence from stone, records, and traces left behind at Giza itself reveals that the myths and modern guesses were wrong.
We have found pyramids in the 1950s by respected Egyptologists, whereby the tomb was sealed, whereby the sarcophagus was intact, and inside there was no body, there was no corpse, there wasn't even a coffin.
For centuries, the pyramids have been shrouded in mystery, surrounded by stories accepted as truth that explain everything except the facts. But buried beneath the desert and etched into the blocks themselves is evidence that changes the conversation completely. It points to planning, organization, and human systems far more advanced than most people realize. Once you start following this evidence, the question is no longer whether the pyramids could have been built by humans, but why we misunderstood their construction for so long. The unexplained evidence. For centuries, the question of how the pyramids were actually built was answered by a number of myths and theories, but now, the evidence emerging from Giza is beginning to challenge what we thought we knew, with researchers still uncovering traces that were never meant to survive. Hidden among the stones of the Great Pyramid are fragments of ancient records, mysterious marks etched into the blocks, and remnants of buildings nearby, but their purpose is difficult to determine. Each clue suggests intention, precision, and planning, yet none fully explains the monumental achievement before us. What do these traces really signify, and who left them behind? Among the discoveries are fragile papyrus sheets filled with logs. These logs described movements of materials, measurements, and schedules, but in a way that raised more questions than answers. The writing is precise, almost obsessive, yet the ultimate purpose of these records was unknown. Until recently, were they instructions for a construction project, a ritual, something else? As the historian Herodotus once wrote, Egypt is the gift of the Nile, but perhaps it also hides gifts of knowledge we are only beginning to understand. Nearby, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of structures and scattered tools. Some areas appear organized, others almost random. Their function, you guessed it right, a mystery. Were these shelters, workshops, storage areas, or something more unusual? We are not sure. Every excavation reveals activity, but how do these structures relate to the massive pyramid above? Some people attribute a sharp remark to Mark Twain, suggesting the Egyptians built the pyramids with no machinery or pulleys. If this were true, what advanced technological methods did they know that we don't? Even the stones themselves hold secrets. Scratches, marks, and symbols etched into some of the blocks are carefully placed. Are these messages, codes, or simply records of work? Why are some stones marked while others are left plain? The patterns hint at intention and planning, but their purpose is what has been bothering scientists and enthusiasts for centuries. What makes this puzzle even more confusing is the scale of the pyramid compared to the evidence around it. Tools, fragments, and buildings suggest work took place, but how is this responsible for the massive structure above? It seems almost impossible to fit these two very different scenes together. So, to unravel this mystery, it's best if we start with the theories that have lasted for centuries. Old stories versus new facts. For centuries, the prevailing story about the pyramids has been one of oppression and brutality. Greek historians, like Herodotus, wrote that tens of thousands of people labored under overseers, dragging massive stones across the desert for decades. Later, storytellers cemented this image in popular imagination, and it became the version most people grew up hearing. People toiled endlessly under a merciless pharaoh. It's a powerful story, dramatic and simple, and it stuck for centuries. There were also some alternative explanations. Some scholars suggested the involvement of a highly organized workforce, acting under a system of state or religious planning. Others ventured into more sensational territory, speculating about lost civilizations with unknown technologies or even extraterrestrial assistance. Even in the 19th and 20th centuries, explorers and archaeologists noticed traces that didn't quite fit the old narratives. Marks on stones, fragmented inscriptions, and scattered ruins suggested activity, although no one could precisely say what it meant. Could these fragments be hints of an organized system, or do they point to something far stranger, something beyond our current understanding? The truth was frustratingly out of reach. But let's face it, the pyramids inspire awe precisely because they seem to defy explanation. If someone were to uncover evidence that clarified these mysteries, it could confirm one theory, disprove another, or reveal a path no one had imagined. The puzzle has always been tantalizing. Fragments hint at method, marks hint at order, but nothing could offer the whole picture of how they came into existence. Observers noticed that certain remains near the site didn't match the narrative of an unrelenting workforce. Could these remains hint at a different kind of participation? Could evidence, if interpreted carefully, suggest a system of labor we haven't yet understood? Scholars have debated these questions for decades. Then there are the logistical mysteries. How were materials moved? How were enormous stones positioned with such precision? Some suggest ramps, levers, or pulleys. Others propose methods lost to time, now only whispered in fragments of ancient records. Could evidence hidden in these fragments eventually validate one of these methods? Or could it reveal something entirely unexpected, something that makes even the cleverest theory seem incomplete? Maybe the technical details could reveal the truth. Technical details. The Great Pyramid of Giza is a structure that has captured the imagination of generations. Standing over 455 feet tall, which is roughly the height of a 45-story building, it is made of an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks. Most of these blocks weigh between 2 and 15 tons, with some of the heaviest granite blocks tipping the scales at more than 50 tons. To put that in perspective, that's about the weight of 10 full-sized SUVs stacked on top of each other, and all of this was achieved over 4,500 years ago, long before modern cranes, trucks, or even the wheel as we know it. Yet the Great Pyramid is more than just a massive stone structure. It was built as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu, one of ancient Egypt's most powerful rulers. The ancient Egyptians believed that pharaohs were gods on earth, and that their spirits needed a secure path to the afterlife. The pyramid's precise orientation to the cardinal points and the meticulous alignment with certain stars suggest a connection to both the spiritual and the astronomical. Every passage, chamber, and corridor was placed with purpose. Some align with the rising and setting of the sun, while others appear to track specific stars, believed to serve as guides for the king's journey to the heavens. The scale of the pyramid is staggering, covering over 13 acres. At its base, the pyramid was constructed from limestone blocks quarried nearby and granite transported from as far as 500 miles away. Each block was cut, shaped, and positioned with remarkable precision. The joints between stones are so tight that it is almost impossible to slide a piece of paper between them. From a distance, the structure appears seamless. Even up close, the craftsmanship is astonishing. How did the builders achieve this level of precision? How did they organize the placement of millions of heavy stones to create perfect geometry on such a massive scale? These questions have fascinated scholars, engineers, and curious minds for centuries. Then, there is the internal layout. The Great Pyramid contains a series of chambers and passageways, including the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the Grand Gallery. The King's Chamber alone is lined with massive granite blocks, some weighing more than 50 tons. The construction of these chambers raises even more questions. How were the stones moved into place? How were they lifted to heights exceeding 300 feet inside the pyramid without machinery? And why were these specific chambers located where they are? The internal structure hints at a sophisticated understanding of weight distribution, engineering, and possibly even acoustics, but the full reasoning behind the design is still debated. The Great Pyramid is just one part of a larger complex. Nearby are smaller pyramids, temples, causeways, and tombs for nobles, suggesting that the area was a ceremonial hub as well as a burial site. The scale of the complex reflects not only the importance of the pharaoh, but also the organizational ability of the civilization that undertook the project. How did they coordinate the construction of so many massive structures over decades? How did they source and move materials, provide food, shelter, and tools for the workforce, and maintain progress with such consistency? Some theories suggest they had extraterrestrial assistance. Could this be true? Archaeologists and historians have long debated these questions. Some have proposed elaborate ramps, levers, or rolling systems to explain how stones were moved and lifted. Others have focused on the planning and organization required to align stones with remarkable accuracy. Every hypothesis acknowledges one thing: the physical reality of the pyramid is undeniable, but the method and scale of construction are extraordinary. The more we study it, the more questions emerge, rather than answers. The purpose of the pyramids also adds to the mystery. They are tombs, yes, but they are also statements. They were designed to project power, to reflect divine authority, and to endure across millennia. Ancient texts suggest that pyramid building was a sacred task, connecting the pharaoh's spirit with the cosmos. Although if the purpose was both religious and political, how did the society mobilize the resources, labor, and knowledge necessary to achieve such an ambitious vision? And what can the physical remnants tell us about the people behind them, even if the records themselves remain silent? Even the stones themselves carry subtle, almost cryptic signs. Could these be indicators of the sequence in which blocks were placed? Could they hint at groups or teams working on specific sections? Or do they record something else entirely? And here's the biggest catch. The more we examine the pyramids, the more we are confronted by a mystery, tangible and elusive at the same time. But what if there was actual evidence that reveals how the pyramids were actually built? The breadcrumbs. The thing is, not a single artifact tells the story on its own, but together, the pieces form a clear pattern. One of the most important pieces comes from a set of ancient papyri written by Merer, an official who oversaw the movement of stone during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. His diary doesn't speak in myths or metaphors. It reads like a work log. Day after day, Merer recorded how limestone blocks were transported by boat along the Nile and through canals to the Giza Plateau. He noted crew assignments, travel times, and destinations. This wasn't guesswork or legend, no, it was pure administration, the kind you'd expect from a large, organized project that depended on planning, scheduling, and accountability. And guess what? That written record lines up with what archaeologists uncovered on the ground. Just south of the pyramids lies a large settlement often referred to as the Workers' Village. Excavations revealed long galleries that functioned as dormitories, along with bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves of bread a day. There were breweries, storage facilities, and areas where tools were repaired. This wasn't a temporary encampment thrown together in desperation. It was a planned settlement designed to support a sizable workforce over many years. The physical remains tell an even deeper story. Animal bones found at the site show that workers were regularly fed beef, sheep, and goat, foods that were expensive and not part of the daily diet for most people in ancient Egypt. What's more, skeletal evidence shows signs of healed fractures and treated injuries, indicating access to medical care. People who were injured weren't discarded, they were treated and allowed to recover. That alone challenges the long-standing image of expendable labor driven until passing. And let's not forget about the tombs. Near the pyramids, archaeologists discovered burial sites belonging to workers involved in construction. These graves were modest, but they were intentional and respectful, located close to the monuments themselves. In ancient Egyptian belief, burial near a sacred site carried meaning. It suggests these individuals were not outsiders or disposable laborers, but participants in a project of immense importance. Some experts interpret this proximity as a sign of honor rather than punishment. The stones themselves add another layer. Inside the pyramids and on nearby blocks, researchers found graffiti written in red ochre. These inscriptions include crew names such as Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure. These were informal markings left by work teams, the kind that in today's world, kids leave at their favorite cafe's walls. Their tone is proud, sometimes playful, but unmistakably human. Crews identified themselves, tracked progress, and left their mark on the stones they handled. When these elements are considered together, they all point in the same direction. The pyramids were built by skilled Egyptian laborers, working in organized rotating crews. This was a managed workforce supported by the state, supplied with food, housing, and care, and coordinated through a sophisticated logistical system. This doesn't mean the work was easy. It was brutal, physically demanding, and dangerous, but hardship alone does not equal slavery. In ancient Egypt, large state projects often relied on a system of labor that combined full-time specialists with seasonal workers. Many likely served for part of the year, returning home when the Nile flood cycle resumed agricultural work. Others, stonecutters, surveyors, and craftsmen, were highly trained specialists whose skills were essential to the project's success. Now, let's make everything clear here. The idea that the pyramids were built by enslaved masses largely traces back to later writers. Greek accounts written thousands of years after the pyramids were completed relied on hearsay and cultural assumptions. Over time, those stories hardened into fact. They were repeated so often that they became difficult to question. But archaeology doesn't care how familiar a story is, it only responds to what's left behind. And what's been left behind tells a story of planning rather than chaos, of organization rather than brutality, and of human capability rather than mystery or fantasy. No aliens, no lost technologies, no vanished super civilizations. Every tool, method, and system implied by the evidence fits within what we know ancient Egyptians were capable of achieving. The pyramids were not miracles that defied human limits. They were the result of humans pushing those limits with discipline, coordination, and purpose. A strong central government mobilized resources from across the kingdom. Administrators tracked supplies and labor. Engineers planned layouts and alignments. Crews worked in shifts, supported by infrastructure that kept the project running year after year. This is how the pyramids were really built, by people who lived, worked, ate, got injured, healed, joked with their co-workers, and went home at the end of their service. People whose names we may never know, but whose fingerprints remain embedded in the stones. And that truth raises an even bigger question. If ancient Egyptians could organize a project of this scale, what does that say about their society, their beliefs, and the power structures that made it possible? Accidental construction? You and I both know that monumental construction doesn't happen by accident. It requires authority, shared belief, long-term planning, and a system capable of coordinating people and resources over decades. In ancient Egypt, those elements came together in a way that was rare, even by the standards of other early civilizations. At the center of this system stood the pharaoh. In the time of Khufu, the ruler was a living embodiment of divine order. The pharaoh was believed to maintain Ma'at, the cosmic balance that kept the universe functioning as it should. Building on a massive scale was a political ambition, sure, but it was also a religious responsibility. A pyramid was not just a tomb, it was a machine for eternity, designed to ensure the pharaoh's transformation in the afterlife, and by extension, the continued stability of the world itself. That belief had real consequences. When a project is framed as essential to cosmic order, participation becomes duty. This helps explain how such an enormous undertaking could be sustained without constant force. The pyramid wasn't only for the ruler, it symbolized protection, continuity, and divine favor for the entire kingdom. Contributing to its construction meant contributing to the survival of Egypt as a whole. An unusually strong and centralized state reinforced this worldview. Ancient Egypt had a bureaucratic system capable of collecting taxes, redistributing food, tracking labor, and enforcing schedules across vast distances. Officials managed storehouses filled with grain. Scribes recorded quantities, deliveries, and assignments. Local administrators coordinated people from different regions, ensuring that labor and supplies arrived where and when they were needed. This wasn't improvisation, it was governance operating at a high level. The Nile played a crucial role in making this system possible. Its predictable flooding cycle created agricultural surplus and seasonal downtime. When fields were underwater, large numbers of people were available for state projects without threatening food production. This rhythm allowed the government to mobilize labor in waves, aligning construction schedules with the natural calendar. Few other ancient societies had access to such a reliable system. Religion, administration, and environment worked together to produce a culture capable of thinking long-term. The pyramids were built with an expectation of permanence. Stones were chosen, shaped, and placed with the assumption they would remain undisturbed for eternity. That mindset reflects a civilization concerned with legacy, memory, and the afterlife. Unlike societies focused on short-term survival, ancient Egypt invested heavily in monuments meant to outlast generations. Social structure also played a key role. Egyptian society was hierarchical, but it was not chaotic. Roles were clearly defined, from priests and officials to craftsmen and laborers. Status mattered, but so did order. This clarity made coordination possible. People understood where they fit within the system and what was expected of them. Large projects could move forward because the society itself was built around predictability and control. What's especially striking is how normalized this level of organization appears to have been throughout ancient Egyptian society. Beyond the pyramids tend to steal the spotlight, but they were only one expression of something much bigger. Once you start looking beyond Giza, it becomes clear that ancient Egypt built monumentally, over and over again, for thousands of years. And each structure adds another layer to our understanding of what this civilization was capable of. Take the temples. At Karnak, near modern-day Luxor, stands the largest religious complex ever constructed. Building began around 2000 BC and continued for roughly 2,000 years. Multiple pharaohs expanded it, each adding courtyards, pylons, statues, and halls. The Great Hypostyle Hall alone contains 134 massive columns, some rising more than 70 feet high and weighing over 100 tons each. Temples like Karnak were economic centers, religious hubs, and political statements all rolled into one. They required constant maintenance, skilled labor, and long-term planning on a scale that rivals any ancient project. Just a few miles away sits the temple complex at Luxor, aligned precisely with Karnak and connected by a ceremonial avenue lined with hundreds of Sphinx statues. This construction reflects a deep understanding of geometry, orientation, and symbolism. Processions moved along this path during religious festivals, reinforcing the connection between gods, kings, and the people. Then there's Abu Simbel, carved directly into a mountainside in southern Egypt during the reign of Ramesses II. 4 colossal seated statues of the pharaoh dominate the entrance, each standing about 65 feet tall. Inside, the temple is aligned so that twice a year, sunlight reaches deep into the inner sanctuary and illuminates statues of the gods and the king himself. Achieving that level of precision while carving solid rock required planning before the first chisel strike. There was no room for trial and error. What makes Abu Simbel even more remarkable is what happened thousands of years later. In the 1960s, when the Aswan High Dam threatened to flood the site, engineers dismantled the entire temple and reassembled it on higher ground. That modern rescue effort revealed just how carefully the original builders had planned the structure. The ancient cuts, joints, and measurements made relocation possible, and an unintended proof of their precision. Burial architecture also evolved far beyond pyramids. In the Valley of the Kings, pharaohs like Tutankhamun were buried in elaborately carved underground tombs, hidden beneath desert cliffs. These tombs were filled with painted walls, ritual objects, and complex corridors designed to protect both the body and the soul. While less visually dramatic than pyramids, they required equal levels of organization, artistry, and belief in the afterlife. Infrastructure projects reflected monumental thinking. Canals, quarries, and causeways. It all reshaped the landscape. Obelisks, single pieces of stone weighing hundreds of tons, were quarried, transported, and erected with astonishing accuracy. What ties all these structures together isn't just scale, it's consistency. Over centuries, Egypt maintained architectural standards, religious symbolism, and construction techniques that were passed down and refined. Knowledge didn't vanish with one ruler. If anything, it accumulated. This was the secret of ancient Egyptian architectural genius. The pyramids weren't built by aliens or by brutal slave labor, but thanks to the social structure and knowledge systems that made ancient Egyptian society so great. So now, it's your turn. How did you think the pyramids were really made? And what do you think about what the evidence suggests? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.